Welcome to this Getting Started with SharePoint Framework Extension tutorial series, and in this tutorial we'll build our first field customizer extension. And this is the release candidate August 2017 edition. You can find these tutorials also in written format from where you can copy the needed strings or needed code, or you can follow up on the video section as well. We strongly recommend you to test these things out because we're heading pretty soon to the general availability, and it's great to understand how you can extend also the modern experiences within SharePoint Online. But let's get on going within this tutorial. So I'm going to move to my console application, and I'm running Windows 10, so I'm going to use a commander for this one. And you can choose wherever you actually want to build your SharePoint Framework solution. In my case, I'm going to use dbnb as my host folder. And then we're going to actually create the field customizer field extension folder here. And let's actually move into that folder as well. So that's obviously an empty folder. So in here, we're going to execute the Yeoman generator. And there we go, Microsoft SharePoint for Yeoman generator for SharePoint Framework. And then we can actually make the choice on what kind of solution we're building, or what kind of elements by default we can actually add here. Key point to remember with the Yeoman generator for SharePoint Framework, you can have absolutely multiple extensions, multiple web parts in a single solution. You just re-execute the Yeoman template in the folder of the solution, and it will provide you again additional selections. Now let's use the default entry as the field extension for the solution name. We are already in the solution specific folder. Yes, let's use that. In our case, in this tutorial, we want this solution explicitly to be installed on a site, so we can answer no on this one. So we're not going to take advantage of the tenant scoped option or tenant scope deploy option, which is available for all of the SharePoint Framework component types as well. And we're going to build an extension, and we're going to build a field customizer extension. And we're going to use the default values for the hello world and hello world description. And in this case, or then it's a matter of choosing, do you want to start with a default template structure for React or with the no JavaScript framework? Key point here to remember, we do support whatever JavaScript frameworks what you want to use. So there's no limitations on that. This is just what are the default solution structures available for specific frameworks. So the fact, as an example, the Angular isn't listed here, or Vue or whatever is not listed in here, it does not mean that you would not be able to take advantage of that. So you choose no JavaScript framework, you just add those references in, and you're good to go with whatever JavaScript framework implementation. Now, this one will take a while, so we're going to speed up the video until the scaffolding of the basic solution structure is completed. And there we go. Now our SharePoint Framework solution structure is ready, so we can actually move into our editor. And in this case, I'm going to use a Visual Studio Code. Again, it's up to you to choose what tooling you want to use for modifying these SharePoint Framework solutions. Now, the basic structure, even though we chose to create an extension, the basic solution structure is exactly the same, because obviously we do not change the SharePoint Framework solution structure. So if you created any of the client-side web parts, this looks exactly the same like it was with that. Because the key point here is to understand is that you can have multiple web parts, multiple extensions in a single solution. It does not change the basic solution structure. So just as well, I could actually execute the same Yeoman generator here, and I can add a web part to the same solution. The questions are slightly different because the solution already exists, and I can add a web part or an additional extension to the same solution. Now, we're not going to do that right now, so let me flip back on the Visual Studio Code, and let's have a look on what actually was created using the scaffolding process. So we have a Hello World extension, which is a field customizer. We can see that it's a field customizer from the extension type. Key point on the manifest to remember is the unique ID of the customizer, because we'll use this one when we're debugging or associating this customizer to an existing field within a site. Now, we're not going to do that right away, or we're going to do that, we're going to first do some debugging and testing that everything works, and then we'll have a closer look on those deployment options after that. Now, in the code side, All of these basic field customizer or basic methods which are available for override are obviously coming from the base field customizer. So I can, if we do F12 in here, we can see that there's no render cell and on dispose cell. And the basic functionality on init is actually coming from the base extensions from there. And let's not actually too much dive into the base classes because that's not really beneficial in this introductions setup, but you'll follow up on where the basic structures and methods are coming from. Now in here you can see that we have a typical onInit method like with any SharePoint framework components, and then we have the specific field customizer specific elements, which is the onRender cell. So this is, as you can see, this is relatively simple. Whenever the field is getting rendered or the UI is getting rendered, we'll take the field value and we'll decorate that with some additional characters, and then we just output that in the inner text of the DOM elements. So really straightforward from that perspective. So let's actually test this right away so we can double check that everything is working properly before we start modifying the extension of Field Customizer based on our requirements for this particular video. So let's first test these things out. So I'm going to move back on the command line, and then I'm going to do gulp serve and no browser. And I'm going to do the no browser because you cannot debug against the local workbench when you're implementing field customizers. So you need to do debugging against the live SharePoint site. And that means that we need to actually there's no point starting the local workbench to do so. Now everything is running in our console. So we're hosting the field customizer from the on-premises. So I'm going to move into our test tenant, which is over here. So there we go. Here's our site, and let's create a quick list here so we can actually see the field customizer in use in practice. So let's create a list. Let's call this list as orders and create. And in this in the list itself, let's actually create an additional number field called percentage. And there we go. So we can actually, or percent actually to be precise, based on the written guidance in the tutorial, percent. And saving that one so we can actually see the percent field in the list. Let's now also add a few items on the list so we can see what's actually, so we can see how the behavior is changing based on the item values. So let's give that a percent a 10 value. Let's add an item B with a value of 30, and then item C with the value of 90. Doesn't really matter for this particular case, but we'll have a look on how we can now debug our field customizer. Now, like mentioned, we cannot do debugging against the local workbench. We will do a debugging and testing of our customization towards this production, or well, not a production tenant, but for a live tenant with live data. So you can actually see how the behavior is acting in a live SharePoint Online site. And to be able to do so, we'll use a specific query parameters which are enabling the debugging option within the site or within the page within the SharePoint Online. So you can copy the structure or copy the query parameters from the written tutorial, and they look somewhat following. So we have the load SPFX, so essentially saying that yes, please do load SharePoint Framework, load the debug manifest from this location, and notice it's pointing to local host. And then we're saying for which field, and in this case we're saying we want to associate this field customizer for percent field, and the field customizer which we want to actually associate to that field is named as following. And this is essentially the unique ID of the field customizer. And for this particular case, we absolutely, and when you're doing the tutorial by yourself, you need to go and update this value. So let's go to our field customizer. Let's go to our manifest, and in a manifest, we can see the unique ID of our field customizer. So let's move back on the Notepad. I'm going to update that unique GUID based on my specific implementation. And then there's the properties values, which could be used for providing additional instance-based properties. In this case, we're going to actually ignore those properties, but it's we can keep it in the query parameter. So I'm going to copy this one, move back to my tenant, and I'm going to actually get rid of all the additional query parameters in here. So let's load that one more time. And I'm going to paste in that query parameter to the URL. And then it means that we're starting to load our existing or our custom field customizer. And I'm going to click the load debug scripts. And as you can see, we're actually loading that individual field customizer, which is extending the output or the value of the field with those additional characters. So this way, we were able to load our field customizer from the local host, and we can easily do modifications and a reload, so you can actually see the changes which you're introducing. Good. So that was basic test that everything is working out. So let's start actually slightly modifying our implementation. So let's go back on the Visual Studio Code, and let's actually modify first of all our CSS settings. So I'm going to do a small modification in here, and then we're going to modify slightly our on-render cell as well. So here we are adding that decorative values, but what we actually want to do is we want to modify slightly the output, and let's have a look on what we are doing in here. So we're adding a styles to the class list. We're adding those additional styles from this definition. There's hello world cell, hello world full, and we're adding that cell value there, and then we're adding that full value in here as well. And then we're outputting a div with the void of the field value. And this is relatively simple example. We're just using the field value to actually draw a small chart in the UI, which will be then more visible from a value perspective. So let's actually save this one. And let's see, there's our commander. Everything should be up and running. We should be fine to go. Let's go back on the browser, and let's actually do a reload of the page. Load debug scripts again, and voila, our implementation has been changed based on the customizations which we just pasted in. So essentially, we are dynamically drawing a chart, which is the length of the chart is equals the value of the field as well. So now if I do and modify this one as an example, let's do that as a 70. You can actually see the query parameter now if I reload this one. So we can actually see that everything is working properly. And it's now at 70, the present value, and all good to go. Good. Simple implementation, quite powerful way of doing modifications. Obviously, super simplistic thing. Quite most likely, I would say, your field customizers might be slightly more complex than this, but the whole point is the basic scenarios and that they work properly within your tenant. That you learn how to build this one by one, or step by step, to be precise. Now. What we want to do next is that we want to kind of make sure that understand how would we then deploy this customizer to be used without the debugging parameters. And to be able to do so, in this particular case, we'll take advantage of the feature framework elements. So I'm going to actually stop the execution of console application. I'm going to move back on my Visual Studio Code. And we kind of take advantage of the feature framework. So the idea is that whenever somebody installs the solution which has this field customizer associated to it to an existing site, we'll create the needed field, we'll create the additional or the needed association between the field and the customizer. There's quite a few different options to make this happen in the real world or in the production usage, but this would be the most typical thing. How would you associate, for example, or the simplistic way to associate or deploy a field and then associate the field customizer to that newly added field. Now, how do we make this happen? Well, first of all, we're going to create a SharePoint folder where we will then create an assets folder. And in this assets folder, we're going to create an elements XML file. And within this XML file, this will be associated dynamically to the solution package SPPKG file. And whenever the solution is getting installed on a site, we're going to make sure that this element XML will be executed as well. And what will be then happening is dependent on the element XML file content. So let's actually add that one in. I copy pasted this directly from the written tutorial, and you can actually start from there, so you don't have to write all of this manually for your sample. So what we're doing here is that we're introducing a new field. When the solution is getting installed, we'll create a new field to the site level, which will be named as SPFX percentage. The display value will be percentage. The type is number, minimum value 0, required false, and it will be in the group of SPFX columns. The key point here from extensibility or extension perspective is this association to client-side component ID. And now I need to go and update this accordingly, so we actually get this one to work properly within our site. And this is the component ID, client-side component ID, and this has to match with the ID of your field customizer in this particular case. So I'm going to copy that ID from my manifest, go back to elements XML file and paste that one in. And there we go. Now we are good from an elements XML perspective, but if we would just package the solution right now, the SharePoint or the Yeoman templates would not be aware that we want actually this elements XML file to be included in our solution. To make that association, we'll need to go to the config folder and package solution JSON. And we're going to modify this package solution JSON slightly to ensure that whenever the solution details and solution is getting created, we'll include that element XML file as part of the package. So I'm going to actually copy once again the needed definition from the written tutorial. So we actually get it right. And let's have a look on what did we actually get. So we have the title of the feature. We have the description of the feature, we have a unique ID of the feature, and this doesn't have to match anything because it's a unique ID of the feature framework feature, which sounds always weird to say, feature framework feature. Anyway, and in this feature framework, whenever the feature framework feature will be activated, we'll actually execute this particular XML. And this is now associating directly to this element XML file, which we created underneath the SharePoint assets folder. So basically, whenever the solution is getting installed, that XML will be activated and executed as well as part of the solution installation. Good. So let's save changes and let's actually go back on the console. So we will package all of these things. So let's do call bundle. That's going to make sure that our code and everything else is up to date and it's compiling properly or transcompiling properly to JavaScript. All good, no exceptions, no mistakes. So now if we do gulp package solution, this will now create our SPPKG file, which is essentially our solution package. And where this one is created is underneath the SharePoint folder and solution folder as well. So we can quickly have a look on that also in the file explorer. So if I go to SharePoint folder and then solution folder, I can actually find my SPPKG file. And this is essentially now my SharePoint framework solution. If you're interested in making sure that your elements XML file is truly inside of the SPPKG file, you could actually open this one up, for example, in 7-zip. That could be one option, but there's a more simplistic option as well. So if you go to the debug folder, which is actually in here as well in the file explorer, you can see all of the files and structures which are inside of the SPPKG file. So this way you can easily see that, hey, my element XML file is included within the feature with the right client-side component ID and everything seems good. What about that setting? Oh, my client-side component ID has currently these settings. Okay, all good to go. Slightly advanced scenario maybe to have a look on this, but it's good to know that you're able to understand and kind of see what's inside of the SPPKG package super easily using the solution structure. Good. Now we're good to go for the deployment. So let's go back on our tenant and let's go to App Catalog. And in the App Catalog, we can drag and drop that solution in. So we can actually install that to the site. And we know that the solution structure and solution content is properly done because we're seeing this trust dialog, so which is essentially also showing that we are hosting this thing from a local host for time being. We're not going to do a CDN setup for the field customizer, but you can easily follow up on our other tutorials how to then go one step further in this journey and add your JavaScript files to the CDN and not just host them from a local host. So let's click deploy. So that's now available within my tenant. And then what we want to do is essentially install that customization to our site. So I'm going to use the same site which we used for debugging testing. I'm going to go a new app and we can see our solution to be available. So let's actually get that one installed on the site. Now, when we install the solution to the site, we will actually get that field created and associated to the site columns or fields in the site level. And to be able to test all of our stuff and to be able to see that our customization is working properly, let's actually create a new list to the site. Let's call this invoices. And click create so that the actual invoices list is created. I'll go back on the site contents page because I want to modify the invoices list slightly. At the same time, we can say that now our field extension client-side solution has been installed. So we know that our field should be now available for us to associate within this list. So let's actually go to the site settings and add and from existing site columns. And so whenever the SBPKG file was installed on a site, we actually provisioned a new site column. So in this case, we want to actually go and add an existing site column to this list. And now if we scroll down in here, we can see that there's a custom SPFX columns group where we have the percentage field. Let's add that one to the list. And now we have the association of the new list, well, the field to the invoices list. Before we test that the UI works properly, let's actually go to our console and do again, let's actually start hosting this. So do culp serve and no browser. So we get everything up and running. We're mimicking the situation that we would be hosting this in CDN or hosting the JavaScript files in a centralized location. Still in this time, we're still doing the hosting from a local host, but the basic deployment would be exactly the same for the CDN-based deployment. Or you could absolutely host this assets also in a random SharePoint tenant folder or a document library, as long as you just upload the files in the right URL and reference the right URL in the right manifest JSON file. Now, this is running, so let's go back on our site. And we're not interested in loading any debugging script. So this is actually good that this came up right now because we're not interested in doing this. I'm going to do here a small quick command, and you might actually run into this one every now and then when you're doing extension testing. So, but you can always do reset equals true, and that means that, hey, I'm not actually interested on the debugging details right now. I want to do mimicking the production usage for this list and for my customizations. And that's going to clear all of the references in the cookies and cookie level. So you don't actually see anymore that association or the starting of the debugging warning. Now, we're in the invoices list. We have a title field, we have a percentage field. We don't know if it works yet because we don't have any items within the field. So let's actually do that. Let's call this item A or invoice A, and the percentage would be 75. And click save, and we can see the UI being rendered properly using our field customizer, even though we don't have any debugging URLs in the URL. So let's add more here. So invoice B and the value is 10. and adding one more, which would be something like invoice C and value 99. So we can see that there's a clear difference on how do we actually render that based on the out-of-the-box rendering. All good. So, like mentioned, the next step in this case would be then actually going to the solution, back to the solution, updating your URL and hosting URL based on the hosting location where you want to host these JavaScript manifest files. In this case, we were still hosting the JavaScript from the local host, but we're no longer doing just the debugging capabilities or debugging settings. But we were able to, key point here is that we're able to actually see our customization being active on the site without the debugging things, and all ready to go on the actual final deployment using the CDN. But thank you for watching. That's all for this tutorial, walking through the basic setup on the field customizer, and your actual implementation for the field customizer probably is much more complicated than this, but the whole point of this tutorial is walk through the basics and the debugging, the deployment processes, and understanding how to do development of field customizer. Thanks for watching.